welcome back to Earthly Visions, a history of the future sound of London. This week we're carrying on with the year of mixes, transmissions and live performances 2009. Starting with the future sound of London, the Electric Brainstorm Volume 5, I Stood There Motionless, the Pod Room, 8th of June 2009.
Anyway, let me tell you what happens, so I can fill you in with the details.
The second Electric Brainstorm to feature a title, I Stood There Motionless, came out a few months after Volume 4, in a year largely devoid of new music, once again created especially for the Pod Room. The cover's use of creepy imagery combined with brutalist architecture immediately suggests something similar to the hauntology of the previous volume, but the mood is actually somewhat different, particularly due to the ongoing narration through the mix. Taken from an audio story, it features storyteller Willem de Ridder telling listeners about his fictional explorations. The mix starts with him talking about being so long without a clock that he lost all track of time, sleeping when tired rather than to a set pattern, overlaid with the opening field recordings from Jorg Reyes and Antonio Zapata's legendary tribal ambient music, before leading into the track itself. The mood is immediately that of some explorer lost in a jungle miles from civilization. The piece closes with the man talking about looking for a temple and sitting by a lake, leading into the atonal modern classical piano and drone of Brandy Ifgray. De Ridder then finds an ancient door with a key in the lock, and some 80s New Age synth music from Brian Slauson plays. The mixture of avant-garde electronics, acoustic improvisation and early synth music throughout the mix is actually remarkably similar to previous Electric Brainstorm volumes, but the subtle differences in the track choices combined with the narration and field recordings give the mix's mood a remarkably different character, feeling far less British and much more exotic. De Ridder is now somewhere in the dark, with bird-called field recordings in the background, and then it's another rare glimpse into FSOL spinning IDM with a Brotham States track. Then there's an environment of muffled, distorted voices, crunching noise and dark drones. The following track is apparently by Carl Blend, a fairly obscure musician who only has one 7-inch release to his name, although finding any trace of either track on it seems to be a fairly fruitless task. It's followed by more muffled spoken word environments, and then to early synth music mode with Klaus Schulze's wonderfully disorienting Voices of Sin, itself overlaid with the avant-garde sounds of the Beau Gamelan ensemble. De Ridder stumbles through the dark once more before further experimental music in the form of Walter Son's glass music and the 90s avant-garde jazz of showroom recordings. Electric Brainstorm's favourite mordant music, Ian Hicks's semi-hauntological synth project, follows, and then it's John Hassell and Brian Eno, a duo whose appearances on FSOL mixes dates back to 1993. Willem de Ridder then tells us about a man who claims not to have slept for 6 months, the background featuring further experimental music using gamelan-style instrumentation, sadly not included in the tracklist. Similarly, an industrial noise piece not included anywhere in the tracklist follows. Then it's on to some more gamelan-style ambient from an early Vangelis album, and into industrial vibes with Iron in Flesh, though somewhat lightened by the Herringle samples. Two Lone Swordsmen blend in seamlessly in the background. Mark Shearer's Long Vehicle follows from a Low Editions library album featuring several Dougans Cobain tracks. The track is surrounded by an abstract piece by 60s Canadian experimentalists Intersystems. Some live throbbing gristle follows, believed to be possibly a live version of After Cease to Exist. And then a long-time mystery, something credited vaguely to DPTV, a wonderful heavy-going percussion-led piece leading to an intense crescendo. It turns out DPTV is Daniel Pemberton TV Orchestra, and the track is by him with overdubs from Brian. There's a sample about kids going to Stanmore CSSM. Thankfully this leads into Faust rather than some children singing Christian songs. What follows is slightly unusual, a track purporting to be from Zeebox's 1984-87 Volume 3, but isn't. This wouldn't be so strange if the album weren't released only a few weeks later. I suppose it gives a good idea of just how late in the day tracklist decisions are made in the FSOL world. A brief snippet of Amorphous sitar follows, what is unlikely to be a full track, rather just a Belushi studio session. Then it's Michael Hedges with his classic acoustic guitar work Aerial Boundaries, an example of an artist I've become a fan of due to an appearance on an FSOL mix. Derek's Red Tape that follows is an example of the charmingly scrappy approach to track lists often found on FSOL mixes, likely to be literally something from a tape found in a box at 9 Ley Lines West from a friend called Derek. Fittingly, it's a lo-fi piece with guitar and cheap percussion that could easily have come from one of Brian's friends in the 80s. Willem de Ridder returns once more, glimpsing the ocean through mountains, with another unknown Gamelan-style track in the background. Current 93's shrill post-industrial sounds blend with some more modern glitch ambient from Michael Santos, before things take a more psychedelic turn with the proggy folk of Le Système Krapauschik. The mix's first modern classical piece comes in the form of Elegy's Screwguard, another track that inspired me to track down the album it came from. It was released on Eric Skodvin's Miasma label. Skodvin himself claims to have been heavily inspired by the band's 90s material. It takes the set into much darker territory. Further Zeebox 3 material that didn't end up on said album follows.
You should really try not to worry too much and just enjoy the festivity.
A spoken sample from Blood the Last Vampire, the first new B-movie quote to appear in a mix for a long time. The mood is lightened somewhat with a daft, playful piece from Hungarian cymbalom player Elmer Balog. De Ridder is finally awake in the day, excited to feel the sun shining on his head again. He asks if everything is real. There follows an experimental piece from death metal band Fullness, not what one might expect from an EBS, and another unreleased Zeebox track. Although including a list of artists with the artwork, the actual tracks featured are not listed anywhere, making it the most difficult tracklist to assemble in several years. At just shy of an hour and a quarter, the mix fits perfectly onto a CD for those who want to burn their own copy, something a bit more common in 2009 than today, admittedly. For quite a while it was my least listened to Electric Brainstorm, entirely due to the lack of exclusive FSOL material, but since approaching it as a mix in its own right, I've grown to really love this one and the unique atmosphere it creates. It's probably my second favourite Electric Brainstorm. It's also the first in the series to contain no samples or tracks from the band's history. Really enjoy the fact that at this point each of the mixes is designed to create its own atmosphere rather than simply all blend in together. As with the majority of the EBS series, the mix is no longer available for purchase, but copies do circulate on Mixcloud and YouTube. Gaz Cobain Park Live Festival, 18th of June 2009. A psychedelic DJ set by Gaz at the 2009 Park Live Festival in Moscow. No more information is known. Typical. Gaz Cobain Harvest Psychedelic Festival, 3rd of July 2009. Harvest are a psychedelic collective who organise multimedia musical events that present live music, DJs and performances within the psychedelic universe. An event took place somewhere in Cardiff in July 2009, featuring Gaz DJing some psychedelic tracks, accompanied by Jonathan Mayer on sitar. Lovely stuff. On screen are a couple of pictures from the Harvest Facebook. Once again, that's all the information we have. Gaz Cobain Beat Herder Festival, 4th of July 2009. Gaz's third live DJ set of the summer at Lancashire-based Beat Herder Festival. No more information or photos around. A monstrous psychedelic bubble exploding in your mind tent, Green Man Festival, 23rd of August 2009. First announced in March 2009, which is pretty good going as far as live Amorphous stuff goes. This was announced before the event for a start. This rather excessive event took place following the huge promotional boost the band got off the back of the first Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble CD release. Initially conceived as a stage with 7 hours of music, it was quickly upgraded to 11 hours, all taking place in a special tent at the Green Man Festival in Wales's beautiful Brecon Beacons. The lineup featured numerous live performances and a couple of DJ slots: Hawkwind, the Amorphous Androgynous, Yellow Moon Band, Nick Nicely's Unlived Lives, Alicia Sufit, Cranium Pie, Gaz Cobain DJ and live sitar, Andy Votel DJ. Once again, all knowledge of the event is gleaned from YouTube videos. This being a fairly large festival and the Monstrous Bubble concept being at its peak of popularity, there are unsurprisingly quite a few videos around, although one would hope for a write-up somewhere. Amorphous-wise, the following tracks are known to have been played: The Emptiness of Nothingness, Guru Song, The Mellow Hippo Disco Show, Falling Down, The World is Full of Plankton, The Peppermint Tree, Elysian Fields and We Have Explosive. It's nice to hear Plankton live, even if it's hard to imagine quite the same majesty coming from the band. A lot of it comes from the ever so well production. Falling Down was a pretty great stunt track, it effectively being the most famous Amorphous track at that point, and The Peppermint Tree is the first known performance of the track. Otherwise it seems to be largely the same songs as previous tours. The lineup looks pretty similar to other recent shows, with the addition of Ed Keane on flute. The only words about the show I've come across from people are from a friend on a message board who was volunteering at the festival and had to face Gaz wanted to go into the backstage of the tent without an ID. He was dressed apparently as Jesus and seemed incredibly annoyed that my friend had no idea who he was. Gaz's DJ set featured Jonathan Mayer playing along with sitar, with Gaz spinning newly heard tracks and tunes dating back to the very earliest Monstrous Bubble shows. Videos appeared on Gaz's YouTube channel, boasting a 12-hour happening, and the 8mm Fly channel, the latter of which claiming to be filmed by Yage, positing the question of whether Brian was present this time. It wasn't too far from where he lives. Judging by the crowd reactions in the videos, the tent was pretty popular, and it's actually surprising a second event like this hasn't been held at another festival, or indeed Green Man once again. Indeed, this came right at the end of the Amorphous Androgynous live experiment, with barely any live shows following. The Amorphous Androgynous Electric Picnic, 6th of September 2009. To give you an idea of just how little promotion was done for the Amorphous Androgynous live shows, I only discovered that this gig happened when I was originally writing the material for this series for a blog a few years ago, more than 12 years after the gig. Thanks to Owen on the FSOL board for bringing it up. The show took place in the Body and Soul venue at the festival. Some comments from Owen give an idea of the show. They were due on at midnight, but after much faffing started about 1 AM I think. It was well attended by people wandering in after other headline acts ended. I don't remember much of the set list and didn't record any video. The venue Body and Soul is a sort of natural amphitheatre and great for more intimate performances. Apart from Gaz, the only other musician I recognised was Alicia Sufit. I spotted the sitar player in a later band photo shoot. They did play All Is Harvest, Falling Down, sung by Alicia, and ended with We Have Explosive, which got a good reaction. Gaz commented that the Falling Down remix was the last official Oasis release before they broke up, which was just a week or two before. The sitar player would have been Jonathan Mayer, and arriving late on stage seems to be an incredibly common occurrence for live Amorphous shows. Otherwise, it seems like a very similar set to others from the time then. No doubt in a few years someone will pop up and mention a dozen other gigs that nobody else seems to have heard of. There is something slightly depressing about Orbital headlining the first night of the event and their former contemporaries being in the tiny text at the very bottom of the show 2 days later. The Future Sound of London, The Archives Sampler 1. I always, quite naturally, assumed that this was simply a digital release of the From the Archives 2LP release. But no, it appears in 2009 a sampler of the first 3 From the Archives albums was sent to digital distributors with a fairly baffling tracklist, including some of the less popular sketch-like tracks, Room 207, Neuro Device Send, as well as closing on a brief environment. Although I'm actually quite pleased to see some overlooked tracks like Make Contact Internal and We're Not Here present, overall, other than opening on favourites Lizard Crawl and Space Squids, I wouldn't say it's a particularly good sampler at all, missing a number of the most immediately impressive tracks from the series. Stick to the 2LP edition tracklist for a sampler of the first 3 releases, and leave this as just a curio. Zeebox 1984 to 1987 Volume 3 Heavily Involved in Drugs. Release date 9th of August 2009. When the first 2 volumes of the Zeebox series were released in 2007, they covered everything announced in 2001, and yet were also described as being parts 1 and 2 of 3, teasing another volume. 2008 and 2009, the first 5 Electric Brainstorms each featured material previewing this 3rd volume. Typically, several of those tracks ended up not being included and remained unreleased, alongside a huge range of other 80s recordings by Brian. Eventually, on 9th August 2009, the album was released on FSOL Digital with the subtitle Heavily Involved in Drugs. While the overall feel of the volume is largely the same as earlier releases, it's also probably a little less lo-fi, slightly cleaner sounding, with a couple of the most conventional tracks in the series, particularly the opener Edney. The ID tags and album description went on to explain much more about the album than on early releases, stating, "Some of these recordings may suffer from wow and flutter. Most have been salvaged from 25-year-old reel-to-reel tapes, some of which had to be baked, and more tellingly, remixed and enhanced 2009 at 9 Leylines West." So this is effectively an Environment series style Zeebox album. Many of the tracks cross-fade into each other, making the album feel more of an FSOL-style soundscape in places. Overall, it's probably the most approachable and straightforward of the 3 Zeebox albums, with slightly less of a lo-fi feel and full of more conventional tracks and more in the way of atmosphere. Each piece also features an image in the ID3 tag, as well as recording details. Videos for 2 tracks were added to Brian's YouTube on the day of release. Edney. The 3rd Zeebox album opens in a truly unconventional manner. A fairly traditional piece of music with drum machines, synth chords, guitar improvisation, electric bass and piano notes. The synth chords and melancholic tone are more than a little suggestive of early FSOL. The title comes from the name of the guitarist Rob Edney, while Ian MacArthur, later of Twitch, plays keyboards. A marvellous track and a real surprise. The accompanying photograph probably features one of the guest musicians, heavily involved in drugs. After an uncharacteristically funky opening, the 3rd Zeebox album heads into the project's most ambient territory with its semi-title track. Some of the 2009 enhancement is clear here, with some birdsong field recordings that are featured on FSOL tracks. The rest of the piece involves shimmering synth pads and murky grumbling coming from various slowed down sounds. A sample of an American man talking about people in need of lawyers brings the title, while other more muffled voices and effects are panned hard left and right. Yower. Is that how you pronounce it? Yower picks up the ambience of the previous track, crossfading in a seamless FSOL style. A muddy recording of acoustic guitar chords runs throughout the track, with mechanical sounds and filtered voices added on top. The accompanying photograph shows part of either Brian's father's studio in Glasgow or his own home studio in Manchester. Hydrogem. A brief burst of abstract noise, and the first Zeebox 3 track to sound like something from one of the earlier volumes. Conceal Them. First heard on Electric Brainstorms 2 under the name Minimal Wave, Conceal Them fits into the minimal wave genre perfectly. Dark synth chords, tinny drum machine and murmured vocals. An extremely rare example of an actual Zeebox song, it's surprisingly catchy. Over the top, Brian's usual bank of sounds and samples adds texture. It's an extremely rare example of hearing Brian sing. Lanes. More Zeebox ambience in the form of Lanes, a track first heard on Electric Brainstorm 1 and 2, initially under the fitting name Stillness. Opening with synth pads and slowed down grumbling sounds, gradually a tinny rhythm comes in and leads to the end. Minimal but atmospherically very effective. Hill Peoples. Hill Peoples begins with some distorted synth notes before going into lo-fi metallic percussion and distorted flute notes, an oddly mechanical and urban attempt at creating something organic and tribal sounding. A scratchy, noisy piece, but with a fair amount of atmosphere too. Self-Pity. Pitch-shifted vocals, lo-fi drum machines, layers of feedback. Self-Pity is classic Zeebox. A brief gap for spoken word in the middle aside, it's quite a hypnotic piece, the rhythm hammering a subtle hole in the head. Bell Trap 7. The bells of the title are in full force in this metallic sounding track. Not sure where the bells are trapped, but it has quite some reverb. The accompanying photo shows one of these Zeebox studio setups. A Dog That Learns. Scottish voice reading information about how dogs respond to stimuli over the top of hollow percussion, bells and weirdly mangled electronic sounds. The second half introduces piano, muffled voices and other typically Zeebox sounds. No dog in the photo, but a shot of Brian driving in the Scottish countryside. It's Too Late. One of the most fully developed and memorable tracks on the album, It's Too Late was first heard on the first Electric Brainstorm mix in 2008, then called Outpot. Dark synth chords, modulated drum machines, creepy childlike melodies, it's a bleakly atmospheric and haunting piece of music and could easily fit in with one of the more lo-fi FSOL digital alias releases. The accompanying photo shows a young Brian with a boombox. Tiki Smith, a brief synth piece with a fast arpeggio fed through various distortion pedals. Guitar and accordion break through briefly in the second half. The tape recorder. The tape recorder begins with some muffled percussion before spoken word takes over, including the title. The second half of the brief track includes ambient synth. Push Them Into Here. One of the more conventional Zeebox tracks, Push Them Into Here features a steady drum machine rhythm over which electric bass and synths play. Comparatively hi-fi by Zeebox standards, it sounds like an instrumental synth pop track and nowhere near as odd or disturbing as its title suggests. Salford Adelphi Building. Although apparently not the building pictured in the attached photograph, the Salford Adelphi building was one of the locations of the recording studios which Brian used as part of his music engineering course. The track itself is a brief detour into clanging synth notes and sequences. She is an alternate take of the track of the same title from 1984-87 Volume 2. Despite its bleeping synths and drum machines sounding reminiscent of the work he would go on to do as Humanoid, the track apparently dates back to earlier than even the album title suggests, recorded in 1983. Deserve to Be Alive. The usual Zeebox tales are present once more. Scuzzy drum machines, a muffled voice sample, reverse sounds and spooky synth drones. A voice shouts out the title at one point. A dark and atmospheric piece. It closes on a loop of someone talking about a hot toddy, and then the synth chords from The Teeth of the Wind make an appearance. Yet another Zeebox track that found later life as an FSOL piece. The accompanying photograph is a headshot of Brian from the 80s. Piano in Kitchen 3. Unlike the first Piano in Kitchen, this piece feels somewhat less literal in its title. Fuzzy synth bass, metallic clangs, occasional crying vocals and other creepy sounds are the emphasis. The titular piano does appear in the second half, albeit in the background playing some jarring notes. Another shot of Brian accompanies the MP3. Lucy Said. Returning to beats after a run of more abstract pieces, Lucy Said features drum machine, funky bass, guitar notes and reversed sounds. The second half focuses more on the backward sounds with layers of what sounds like reversed guitar notes. Despite not being overtly poppy, it is a fun and memorable piece. Bell's Trap 5. More clattering metal, this time accompanied by sine wave notes, speaking and glockenspiel. A strangely light and naive sounding track amidst all the Zeebox darkness. Spearhead. A thickly textured ambient track with layers of fuzzy, unidentified sound. There are certainly numerous synths in there and likely some field recordings, but the whole thing is so dense and layered with reverb and delay that it's difficult to make out any details. An oddly warm blanket of sound from the usually stark Zeebox. When. A voice says when, I think. It also sounds like Clem. Another asks questions quietly in the background. The only one of these bizarre little snippets on the third Zeebox album. Counting Pleasures, a rhythmic piece that brings 84-87 Volume 3 back to a more musical approach with drum machine beats, an oddly distant synth riff and spoken word. The track bears some resemblance to the more electronic end of New York's early 80s no-wave movement. the longest released Zeebox track, running to nearly 7 minutes. Small Mechanical Hands. Another track predating the album title, this brief snippet from 1983 is a short montage of metallic sounding loops and yelping voices. The accompanying image is a marvellous surreal photo collage. Throwy's Friend. 40 seconds of gurgling and growling synth. I'm sure Throwy's Friend was flattered. Hill Peoples 2. Seemingly musically unrelated to the first Hill Peoples, this lengthy Zeebox track was first heard on the first Electric Brainstorm, a fairly minimal track with clicking percussion and light atmospheric synth notes. As for the few tracks on the album, it's considerably brighter in tone than the usual Zeebox sound. Rusholme. A brief drone piece named after the student-occupied area of Manchester. Transmission Gallery. Back into weirdness with this piece featuring bizarre slowed-down vocalisations and what sounds like an entire band of clattering metallic percussion, the two sections are linked by some comedy-sounding sped-up piano chords. Dirty Piano Constant. A shot of Brian sat next to a piano accompanies this bleak piece to end the Zeebox trilogy. Doom-laden piano chords, thudding percussion, muffled vocals with metallic hits echoing into silence to end. The more abstract side of Zeebox summed up perfectly. And that's it for this week. Hope you enjoyed the video. Do leave me comments down below about what I've been talking about, if you heard any of it, if you were even there at the gigs. Tell me if there's a show that I missed from the Amorphous. There's probably about 20 of them. And also press like, subscribe, share if you want to do any of those things. All interactions really help my channel. I'll be back next week with the final video covering 2009. Hope you join me then.